While working through the daily grind of your hectic life, have you ever wondered, how can I start living my dreams and travel the world? Well, I did. So I made a conscious choice to discover, define, and live my dreams and overcome my fears. I found what works, and now I'm ready to share with you the tools to help you live your dreams, one adventure at a time. Heading over to Pauilo, to my friend Dave Steiner's Aloha farm. But this is the road. Okay, you gotta check this out. Yeah, this is the main road in. He never quite told me that I really should have had the Jeep. And he never quite told me that this borders on inaccessible. Dave is funny. Anyway, you'll meet him in just a bit.
Hello, Dave. Well, Jim, this is a coffee seed that's germinated and is just starting to push out of the ground. And you can see the actual coffee seed there up on the top of that stalk. And it's set its roots down. And what will happen is it will grow up maybe about another ½ an inch before that seed gets kicked off. And there'll be two rather rounded leaves that come out. It'll produce 2 more sets of those round leaves, and then it starts to make the really, the type of leaf, the blade leaf that the coffee tree is known for, and it'll have for the rest of its life. It'll drop those 4 rounded leaves. After about 6 to 10 months, it drops those, and just the blade-shaped leaves are what remain. This is a tree that we pruned last year, about this time of the year, and we took it down to what was about my knee high. So I took it down right about here, and then we allowed all of these suckers to grow up, and we've desuckered a couple of times. And desuckering means we snip off the verticals that are growing up off the trunk. And the reason that we want to do that is to thin it out, let more light get in, and that allows more fruit to be produced by the tree. Not sure if you're going to be able to see this or not. I'll try to open it up, but it creates like a cone of branches, vertical branches, and these become the new tree. And you can see how the bark is forming, the woody bark is forming. So to about here grew in the first maybe 6-8 months. All of this is new growth since then. So next year it'll probably be about that tall, and it will start bearing fruit.
How tall?
About here. Go up another 1.5 to 2 feet. But all of this will be bearing fruit, as opposed to when we cut it down, it was just what was growing on that single trunk.
Wow. That
single trunk was up to as tall as the other trees in the area. And all the energy was going up vertically and less into the branches and fruit.
And again, how long does it take for a tree from seedling to bear fruit?
About 6 years. We tend to plant seedlings when they're about 18 months old, and then from that time it takes another 4 years. And then when you prune them, you prune the single trunk, you allow the suckers to grow up, you snip those suckers down, and I will desucker this a couple more times. But you try to desucker it to the point where you only have 4 new vertical branches coming up on the sides of the tree, from the trunk. And those hopefully will be balanced at the cardinal points or in some semblance of balance. The light will come down in the center and ripen all the fruit on all 4 of those new verticals. You don't quadruple your production on that tree, but you way more than double it. So it's a healthy way to create more vigor in the tree. Anytime a plant thinks that it's going to get killed, it tries really hard to survive. And so that's what we do. We cut it down and tap our heels and say a little prayer and hope that it will send out the signals to grow, grow, grow. And like this one did, it does. It grows up like gangbusters. So nice, good, healthy growth. It's just time for some flowers and some coffee fruit.
Excellent. Let's go look at some that actually have some fruit on them.
Right. Most plants that bear fruit on the newest woody growth. So from about here to here, you can see the woody growth, or the bark formation, is the newest, and that's where the fruit is. This is all growth from this past year. Next year, this will be all covered in bark, and the branch will extend out another 6-8 inches. This was the year before, and you can see we had fruit that we picked off of here.
Oh.
So Jim, a lot of people ask, well, why do you prune? That's pretty radical to chainsaw down a tree all the way to knee high. Because otherwise, we have to pull this tree all the way down to get the fruit that's growing at the top of the tree. But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to do that with every single tree, and we could just pick coffee right around here? This tree was pruned last year. It's got nice bushy growth. It's going to produce some fruit from here to here next year. Perfect picking height. The energy of the tree doesn't have to go 8-10 feet up in the air before it can produce fruit.
Is there any downside to trimming it?
I really can't think of one. In most parts of the world, coffee trees have been shown to bear fruit for about 50 years, or 25 to 50 years, and then they peter out and they just stop regrowing. And in Hawaii, we haven't found that yet. There are trees that are well over 100 years that are still bearing fruit.
Let's talk about the trees, the coffee trees right behind you for just a moment.
Okay.
And these obviously have some green cherries on them. Now, the beans, when they're still in the husk, you do call them cherries.
Cherries, yeah.
And we refer to that as the fruit. Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
The cherries on these trees, and almost all coffee in Hawaii, ripens in a particular fashion, and it might depend on your particular geography. But generally speaking, to use a broad brush, my trees ripen from east to west, and from the ocean side or the Makai side of the farm to the Mauka side, or the mountains side of the farm. I think that has to do with the amount of sunlight and perhaps the amount of warmth that they get. But that's just, I've noticed on my farm. Within each tree, they'll ripen, generally speaking, from the inside out. So the last ones to ripen will be these on the end. I think that that's a function purely of age. These were the last ones to blossom and form fruit. Those were the first ones to blossom and form fruit.
And do you have one production per year, or as is typical with Hawaii, do you have more than one?
Yeah, I have more than one. My harvest runs from mid-January, early February until July, and then I have what I refer to as my echo, and that is September and October. Because I think perhaps of global warming, I'm starting to see a shift. We got a lot of rain this past couple of months, and the way coffee ripens, from the time that you got an inundation rain to the flower forming and the ripe fruit being picked is about 9 months. So we got a bunch of rain in October. We're going to be picking coffee in July and August. Jim, this is a great example of the importance of hand harvesting, and why we can only harvest by hand on the Hamakua. Coffee doesn't ripen all at once. This is a ripe coffee cherry. Right beside it, nowhere near ripe. Probably several months from being ready to pick. If I were to use mechanical harvesting, it would have taken all of these green cherries off just to get this one red cherry. That's ridiculous, but that's the way mechanical harvesting has to be done by its very nature. So we pick everything by hand to ensure the best beans are picked, and only the ripe beans are picked.
What happens when a coffee farmer picks coffee that is too green?
When you pick green coffee, from a drinker's perspective, you'll know right away. Underripe coffee is very bitter, and there's no way to get that bitterness out of the coffee. The sugars haven't hasn't completely formed, and what you're left with is just a very bitter, tannic seed, and it's going to make for a cup that doesn't taste very good.
What are we looking at here? What do you call that?
These are the two seeds. You can see the flat side and the rounded side.
Oh yeah.
That were inside this cherry skin. The cherry skin actually has more caffeine in it, and the slimy coating and the skin have more caffeine than these two seeds combined. Nature has a way, anytime it wants you to ingest something, it makes it sweet. So in this case, it's trying to get you to eat these seeds and propagate the seeds by spitting them out, because you're going to enjoy the taste of the sweetness of this slimy coating and the cherry skin. If this were a pea berry, only one of these would have formed, and the other one would have just been a shell around it, and the whole seed would have rounded out. I built this building because the weather in the Hamakua is a little wetter and colder than in other parts of the island, and that helps a lot with the growing of the coffee and the ripening of the coffee, not so much with the drying of the coffee. So by building this building with plastic sheet walls and clear plastic roof, I capture all the solar radiation, and this room is about 20 degrees warmer than the ambient outside. And that helps to accelerate the drying so that I can get my beans dry as fast as possible, which is the key to keeping the flavor intact. We put in shelves that are a foot apart in elevation, from 1 foot off the ground up to 7 feet. And there are 115 of them. And I can fit about 20 pounds of coffee on each of the trays. And as you can see, they just dry right on these shelves. But I still try to get solar drying by keeping them out in the sun for 3 to 5 days. And we'll bring them in or cover them if it starts to get misty. But then after that's done and they're kind of damp dry, we'll bring them in here, and that allows them to speed dry. And then it's also a great temperature and humidity for storing them. And I can keep it in this parchment layer, the pergamino layer, for several months before we hull it and roast it. And it just keeps it just perfect, spot on moisture-wise, for a good roast, a good evening roast. I tried to use as few chemicals in the building of this as possible. I didn't want to have any kind of smells taint the coffee. So it's just a lot of bare wood, and that also helps to absorb some of the moisture from the beans a little faster.
And what do we have right here in the foreground?
These are bags of coffee. After they've been on the shelf and dried for several weeks, I'm going to bag it up. And this is parchment coffee that will have this pergamino layer rubbed off, basically, is what happens. See, it's just like parchment paper. It's just crispy. And that comes off, and then there's a silver skin layer that's on the inside that just clings to it a little bit tighter. But when we put it through the huller, that layer also comes off. And you just get a nice, clean, blue-green bean that you then put in the roaster. And each of these bags has about 65 to 75 pounds in them. And I do that even though the standard is between 100 and 150 pounds to spare my back. But that's just me. So it means I have twice as many bags, but they're easier to lift. Here's a pea berry. So out of those handfuls that I just had.
Keep holding it there. And again, the difference between the pea berry and the regular coffee is what?
The pea berry is when there's only one seed that forms inside the coffee fruit. And because there is only one seed that forms, it doesn't develop that flat side that the other beans have. The flat side forms because of the internal pressure of the fruit, and it creates the flat side, and then the rounded side of the coffee seed is the outside of the fruit. But in the case of a pea berry, which in this year's crop is about 4% of the time, one of those two seeds died early in the process of development. It just formed a little wrapping around the remaining seed. And that seed, rather than having a flat side, bulges out and looks more like a football. And that's what they call the pea berry. So all the nutrition that would normally go into the two seeds goes just into the one. And also because it's round, because it's bulged out, it rolls when it's being roasted. So you get a nice even roast. Whereas the flat-sided beans will sometimes get stuck on that flat side as they're roasting. And you'll get a charred side on the flat side and an under-roasted side on the rounded side. So the flavor is different in a pea berry. First, because of the nutrition going in to the one seed rather than two. Second, because of the rounding. And I suppose third, which is a function of the first. If you take this larger flat-sided seed and this smaller pea berry seed and slice them and put them under a microscope and you're looking at the cross-section, the flat-sided seed looks like a sea sponge. And the pea berry is much more dense. It look more like cork. There are still air holes, but there's a lot fewer of them. So it's a denser bean. So when you go to roast it, you're roasting more coffee and less air bubbles, which of course would give you more coffee flavor, a more intense layer of flavor, and then also give you more caffeine, which for some people is a huge plus, and for others is not as big of a bonus, but that is the case with pea berry. So more intense flavor, smaller bean, and more of what people look for in coffee.
Excellent. Thank you.
So Jim, this is a Suriname cherry tree, and the Suriname cherry, I believe, comes from Suriname in South America. But they're really cool because they look like these red Chinese lanterns. They even have a little hanging down fringe that look like the lanterns that you'd see hanging in Chinatown. I don't think they really taste like a cherry, but they have a single pit like a cherry has. It's a little hairy, kind of like a lychee, or I guess a rambutan seed. But they've got a spicy taste to them. So they're a little like a cherry, but with a spice to it. And they make an amazing jam or a chutney. I've seen people add it to stuffing that they put in their Thanksgiving stuffing.
Oh, fantastic.
It's pretty cool. And pies. So one of the many tropical fruits that will grow well here at Java Aloha. This tree, it's a Tahitian lime tree. And the reason it looks the way it does is that it's been a prolific bearer for about 5 years running. I can't get it to stop bearing fruit. So each year I get about 400 limes off of the tree. And I don't think any lime tree of this size was ever meant to bear that many limes for such a long period of time.
Yeah, I noticed the one on the other side of the field here that has more lemons or limes than I've ever seen on one tree and hardly any leaves.
Yeah. That's a Meyer lemon tree, and I think that the size of the fruit just strips all the energy out of the tree, but it makes a mean limoncello.
Nice. Let's head over there.
It's just extra other things that grow on the farm. They all flower a lot because they're so prolific, and that attracts bees and pollinators, and those help to pollinate the coffee.